Emma had never felt more nervous walking into the science classroom. Her books clutched tightly to her chest as she scanned the room filled with students chatting and laughing, their voices a comforting buzz she almost wished she could join. But her heart thumped too fast for her to speak. She had always struggled with science, numbers and formulas slipping past her mind like water through fingers, and now with a semester-ending project looming, the thought of being paired with the wrong partner made her stomach twist in knots, imagining someone impatient or condescending, someone who would notice every small mistake she made, someone who would make her feel smaller in front of the class. But then the teacher called out names and fate seemed to take a strange turn, pairing her with Lucas, a quiet boy who had a reputation for being brilliant yet distant, the kind of person who spoke little but when he did, everyone listened, the kind of person whose mere presence could make someone self-conscious. And as he walked over, his steps measured, careful, a faint smile flickering across his face, Emma felt an unexpected flutter of nerves mixed with curiosity. Lucas looked at her with eyes that seemed both observant and hesitant, as if he was measuring whether she was someone he could trust, and she realized immediately that working with him would be a challenge, but also a chance to grow, to finally prove she could handle more than she thought. And when he opened his notebook and started outlining the project, his voice calm yet certain, Emma struggled to keep up with the speed of his thoughts, but she also noticed how he paused every now and then, glancing at her, checking if she understood, a small, almost imperceptible act that made her heart beat faster. She realized that despite his brilliance, he wasn't arrogant, he seemed thoughtful, considerate, and that tiny realization sparked hope inside her, a hope she hadn't felt for a long time in classrooms. And as they began working together after class, sitting at a corner table where the light from the window cast a soft glow on their papers, Emma felt a tension she couldn't name, a mix of anticipation and admiration, the kind that made her fingers fidget and her mind race. Every time Lucas explained a concept, she hung on his words, nodding, asking questions, trying not to stumble over her own nervousness, and he responded with patience, correcting mistakes gently, encouraging her when she faltered, and she felt a strange warmth in her chest, a mixture of relief and admiration, feeling seen in a way that made her want to lean closer, to understand more, to not let this connection fade. But then, without warning, he paused mid-sentence, pen hovering over the notebook, and his voice dropped to a soft, uncertain murmur. "I think, maybe I should step back," and her stomach sank, a sudden wave of panic rising inside her, the words slicing through the fragile comfort they had built together. "You'd be better off without me," he added, and she could see the weight of his own doubts reflected in his eyes, the kind of doubt that wasn't about the project but about himself, and Emma felt a rush of emotion she couldn't suppress, a mix of desperation and longing, realizing that she didn't want him to step away, not from the project, not from her, not from this unexpected companionship that had quickly become something important, her voice barely more than a whisper, trembling yet firm. "Please, don't quit," she said, and the words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning, and she watched him hesitate, his hand freezing over the page, a tremor in his fingers betraying the calm exterior he usually maintained. She wanted to tell him everything she felt, that she needed him here, that she trusted him more than anyone else, that somehow, despite the awkwardness, she felt drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain. But before she could add another word, the classroom door creaked, and both of them jumped, hearts racing, the sudden sound a stark reminder that they weren't alone. Someone could walk in at any moment and see them like this, and Emma felt her face heat up, a mix of embarrassment and adrenaline flooding her senses, yet she couldn't look away from Lucas, whose gaze met hers with a flicker of surprise, concern, and something deeper that she couldn't name yet, a silent conversation passing between them in the tense pause as the footsteps outside drew closer and then receded, leaving them breathless and aware of how close they had been. And in that moment, Emma realized just how much she had come to depend on him already, how much his presence, quiet but steady, had anchored her, how the idea of him leaving felt unbearable, how even a simple classroom project had become a thread connecting them in unexpected ways, and she silently vowed to herself that she would do whatever it took to keep him here, to keep him from walking away, to keep this fragile, electric connection alive. And she saw Lucas finally exhale, a small, almost invisible smile tugging at his lips, his pen lowering to the paper, and she felt a tiny victory surge through her chest, relief mingling with the new, thrilling awareness that their story had only just begun, that this project, this classroom, this quiet corner where two uncertain hearts had met, was already shaping something neither of them could have predicted, and as they bent back over their work, pens scratching against paper, she felt the subtle brush of his hand near hers, an innocent contact, yet enough to send warmth through her that left her mind dizzy with possibilities. And she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, calculations, experiments, deadlines, none of them mattered as much as this unspoken bond forming between them, this delicate, tender trust, and for the first time in a long time, she looked forward to coming back to class, to seeing him again, to continuing something she didn't yet have words for, but felt deeply in her chest, as the late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the classroom floor, marking the beginning of something small, fragile, but intensely alive, and Emma whispered to herself, barely moving her lips, "Please don't quit, not just for the project, not just for the class, but for the quiet, stirring connection she had found in the most unexpected place, a connection that made her heart race, her thoughts spin, and her hope bloom in ways she had never imagined possible." And Lucas, noticing the intensity in her eyes, nodded ever so slightly, as if silently promising he wouldn't, and together they returned to their work, unaware that that single, fleeting moment, the near panic at the creaking door, had changed the course of both of their days, their semester, and perhaps, their lives, leaving both hearts acutely aware of each other, fragile, electric, and full of possibilities. The days after their first project session were filled with a mixture of excitement and anxiety for Emma. Every time she walked into the classroom her chest tightened at the thought of seeing Lucas, wondering if he would continue to stay by her side or retreat into the quiet shell he often wore, but to her relief, he arrived promptly, carrying his notebooks with that calm, almost measured demeanor that made her heart flutter and reminded her how different he was from anyone she had ever known. And as they gathered their things and found a quiet corner to work, Emma noticed small gestures she hadn't before, the way Lucas pushed his hair back when he was thinking, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the soft, almost imperceptible way he glanced at her when he made a point or explained a difficult formula. And she realized that there was a kindness in him that wasn't obvious at first, a patient understanding that made her feel safe enough to ask questions, to stumble over explanations, and to admit when she didn't understand something, which she had rarely been able to do in front of other students without feeling embarrassed, and she noticed that Lucas didn't correct her sharply or sigh impatiently. Instead, he repeated the explanation, sometimes using metaphors, sometimes drawing little sketches in his notebook, his hands moving carefully but with purpose, and Emma felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a mix of admiration and gratitude, and she found herself laughing at his little jokes, even when they were quiet and understated. And Lucas's smile, small but genuine, made her feel seen, noticed in a way that was new and thrilling. And yet, beneath all this, there was still a tension, a subtle nervousness that neither of them fully acknowledged, as if both were aware that something delicate was forming between them, a bond that was emotional, personal, and almost too quick to name. And one afternoon, while they were setting up a complicated experiment with glass beakers and liquid measurements, Lucas's voice dropped softly, almost uncertainly, "I'm just scared, Emma. What if I mess this up?" And she froze for a moment, the words catching her off guard, realizing that even someone who seemed so confident could feel doubt, vulnerability, and fear, and she reached out lightly, her fingers brushing against his hand by accident, but the touch lingered longer than necessary, and she felt a spark that made her stomach twist pleasantly, a combination of worry, hope, and something she didn't want to name yet, and she said, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart, "You won't mess up. I trust you. I need you here." And Lucas looked at her, his eyes wide and reflective, as if surprised by the intensity in her gaze, and for a moment, the classroom seemed suspended, the usual sounds of students outside and the hum of the lights fading into the background, leaving only the two of them, close yet careful, aware of the quiet electricity of shared moments. And just as they leaned back into their work, the classroom door creaked again, a sound that made them both stiffen, their heads snapping toward the entrance, hearts hammering in synchrony. And Emma realized how quickly fear and exhilaration could intertwine, how the simple act of being near Lucas felt charged with meaning and possibility, and she gripped his arm lightly, a silent reassurance, "It's okay. We're just working No one needs to know, and he exhaled, a small smile flickering across his lips, and she felt relief sweep through her in waves, but also a lingering pulse of tension that made her more aware than ever of the delicate balance of proximity and restraint between them. And in the days that followed, their sessions became almost a ritual, the quiet companionship building a rhythm that was comforting and intoxicating at the same time, with each glance, each shared notebook, each gentle correction and encouragement layering feelings they didn't speak aloud, a tender intimacy forming in small ways, in gestures, in shared laughter, in moments of accidental closeness, and Emma began noticing herself thinking about him even outside the classroom, replaying conversations, imagining the tilt of his smile, the thoughtful crease of his forehead, the way he explained a concept with patience and clarity, and Lucas, for his part, seemed more at ease when she was around, his quiet demeanor softening slightly, his answers warmer, his voice carrying a faintly teasing tone that made her cheeks flush, and the project, though important, became secondary to the subtle dance of connection, of emotions neither dared to name, yet both felt deeply, as if every moment together in that classroom pulled them closer without words, a shared heartbeat of anticipation and longing. And one afternoon, as the sunlight slanted through the tall windows casting golden lines across their desks, Emma noticed how Lucas hesitated before speaking, his pen hovering over the page as if he were about to say something significant, and she leaned forward slightly, curiosity and nervousness mingling, and he finally said softly, "I don't know why, but being here with you, it feels important, more than it should." And her heart leapt, not with surprise, but with recognition, for she had felt the same unspoken bond, the same pull, the same quiet excitement and fear of what was growing between them, and she swallowed, feeling her throat dry, and said, "I feel it too," her voice barely above a whisper, and in that shared admission, a fragile but undeniable connection solidified, their hands brushing again over the notebooks, a touch gentle but electrifying, and the awareness that someone could enter the classroom at any moment made it all the more urgent, the stolen closeness, the soft glances, the laughter and shared frustration over experiments, all intensified by the risk of exposure, by the thrill of private moments in public spaces, and when they packed up for the day, the shadows stretching long across the floor as the sun began to set, Emma and Lucas walked side by side, their shoulders nearly touching, the air between them charged with emotions neither fully understood but both welcomed, and as they reached the door, Lucas looked at her, a faint blush on his cheeks, a hesitation in his smile, and said quietly, "I'm glad you asked me to stay," and Emma felt warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief, hope, and anticipation, knowing that while nothing had changed in the eyes of the world, something had shifted between them in a way that mattered more than anything else, and as they stepped into the hallway, their conversation flowed easily, laughter mingling with thoughtful silences, both acutely aware of the unspoken tension, the gentle pull of attraction and emotional connection, the realization that trust, care, and vulnerability could bring people closer in ways they hadn't expected. And Emma's thoughts lingered on the moments when he looked at her, smiled, or paused to explain something patiently, and she wondered if he noticed the same flutter in her chest when he did these small acts. And as they left the school that evening, the corridor empty except for the echoes of their footsteps, both felt the thrill of shared understanding, the subtle, growing intimacy that promised more moments, more conversations, more silent recognition of feelings neither had yet dared to fully explore, and Emma, her heart light but pounding, whispered to herself as they parted ways, "Please don't leave. Please don't step back," knowing that the bond they were building, fragile and tentative though it was worth holding on to, worth nurturing, and that this project, this classroom, this quiet partnership, was slowly becoming the most important part of her days. A source of joy, comfort, and anticipation, a place where two hearts were learning to beat in tandem, quietly, carefully, yet with a thrilling awareness that the story between them was only beginning, and that every shared glance, every gentle word, every careful gesture mattered more than any grade, more than any assignment, for they were discovering something far deeper than science, something tender, emotional, and utterly human, a connection that would shape the rest of their semester, and perhaps even beyond, leaving both Emma and Lucas acutely aware that the quiet, intimate moments of trust and attention they shared in the classroom were creating a bond neither of them could ignore, a subtle promise of closeness, care, and emotional resonance that made every day feel more vibrant, more meaningful, and more charged with the potential of what might grow between them. And as Emma closed the school door behind her that evening, the weight of all these unspoken emotions pressed gently on her heart, leaving her both nervous and exhilarated, certain of one thing: whatever happened next, she didn't want him to quit, she didn't want him to step back, and she hoped, silently, desperately, that he felt the same. Weeks passed, and Emma could feel the subtle rhythm of her days revolving around Lucas, the quiet anticipation of their classroom sessions becoming the most vivid part of her life, each day a mix of nervous excitement and deepening admiration. She found herself arriving earlier, hoping for a moment alone with him before the noise of students filled the room, and even the smallest interactions, the brush of a hand against hers as she reached for a pen, the way he leaned over her shoulder to correct a formula, or the gentle tilt of his head when he explained a tricky concept, made her heart race in ways she hadn't expected. And Lucas, for his part, seemed increasingly comfortable around her, his usual quiet, reserved demeanor softening whenever they were together, his patience and gentle guidance never faltering, yet tinged with an intensity that made Emma notice him in ways she couldn't ignore. From the thoughtful pause before he spoke to the subtle glance he cast her way when no one else was looking, and she started to recognize patterns, little signs of care, subtle gestures of attention that felt personal. And while neither had said anything overtly romantic, the emotional connection between them had grown undeniable, a quiet bond that pulsed under every shared look, every laugh, every accidental touch. And one late afternoon, as they stayed behind after the classroom emptied to finish a particularly complex experiment, the sunlight fading through the high windows, Lucas paused mid-step, hands resting on the desk, and Emma noticed a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, a vulnerability that made her chest tighten, and she realized that he was as aware of the closeness between them as she was, that the unspoken tension, the subtle energy that had been building, had reached a point where it could no longer be ignored, and she felt a surge of courage mixed with fear, knowing that this moment, private and charged, could be interrupted at any second, that their fragile bubble could shatter if anyone walked in. And yet she also felt a compelling need to let him know, even indirectly, that she valued him, needed his presence, and trusted him, and she brushed against his arm, intentionally this time, a light contact that sent warmth through her, and Lucas's eyes met hers, the softest of smiles tugging at his lips, a quiet acknowledgement of the feelings they were both trying to navigate, and for a moment, words were unnecessary, the silence between them heavier than any spoken sentence, carrying the weight of longing, trust, and mutual recognition. And then, as they bent over the experiment, adjusting measurements and double-checking results, Lucas's voice cut softly through the quiet. "Emma, I don't want this to end," and her heart leapt at the admission, her pulse quickening, for she had felt the same, though she had never voiced it, and she realized how much she had come to depend on him, not just for help with the project, but for the comfort, encouragement, and quiet presence he provided. And the classroom, dimming with the late afternoon sun, seemed suddenly smaller, more intimate, as if the space itself recognized the tension and closeness between them. And Emma, her voice barely audible, whispered, "Neither do I," a simple phrase that carried the weight of weeks of shared moments, mutual support, and unspoken attraction. And as they both looked up, the sound of the door handle rattling violently froze them in place, heads snapping toward the source, hearts pounding in unison, the adrenaline of a potential interruption making every heartbeat louder. And in that sudden instant, Emma felt a mixture of panic and exhilaration, the fragility of their moment heightened by the possibility of being discovered, their closeness, private and delicate, suddenly at risk. And Lucas stiffened, his hand instinctively moving closer to hers as if for reassurance, and she felt the warmth of that contact grounding her, giving her courage even as the fear surged. And they both remained perfectly still, pretending to be engrossed in their notes as the shadow of the janitor passed outside the window, a fleeting presence that made the tension thrum like electricity through the room. And when the coast was clear, they exhaled together, a quiet laugh escaping Emma, the relief mingling with lingering awareness of the closeness they had just shared and almost lost. And Lucas gave her a small, conspiratorial smile, a look that said more than words could, acknowledging the intensity of the connection and the thrill of their secret. And as they returned to the experiment, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions, Emma realized how deeply she had fallen into this pattern of noticing him, depending on him, longing for his presence, and imagining the softness of his smile even when he wasn't there, and Lucas, in turn, seemed increasingly attuned to her reactions, the way she tilted her head when confused, the way her eyes lit up with understanding, the way her laugh, quiet but full of warmth, made the room feel brighter, and though neither had confessed the depth of their feelings, the bond was undeniable, built not on grand gestures but on shared vulnerability, care, attention, and the thrill of moments that felt uniquely theirs, a private world within the walls of a classroom, small and fragile yet charged with emotional intensity, and as the evening light faded, Emma realized that she didn't just want to finish the project with him, she wanted to linger in this quiet, suspended world, to explore the emotions that had begun to surface, to see if Lucas felt the same pull she did, the same mixture of anticipation, fear, and longing, and she caught herself imagining scenarios where they could remain close, talking, laughing, studying, and sharing quiet moments without anyone else intruding, and Lucas, noticing the intensity in her gaze, seemed to understand, offering a reassuring smile, a fleeting touch of the hand, a soft word, and Emma felt her pulse quicken, recognizing that these small acts were more meaningful than anything else, building trust and connection in ways that words alone could not, and she was acutely aware that their proximity, their shared laughter, their gentle teasing, and mutual attention had created a bond that was both tender and exciting, and that every day, every interaction, every subtle glance was shaping something far deeper than a school project, something that could blossom into a meaningful relationship if they dared to acknowledge it. And as the classroom grew quiet, shadows lengthening across their desks, Emma felt a rush of determination mixed with nervous excitement, knowing that she wanted to nurture this connection, to continue building trust, intimacy, and understanding, to explore the delicate emotions growing between them, and Lucas, noticing her intensity and quiet resolve, seemed similarly drawn to the shared space, the silent acknowledgments, the gentle rhythm of their interactions, and in that charged yet controlled environment, they both sensed the beginning of something significant, a connection that transcended the ordinary boundaries of classmates, a bond formed in shared vulnerability, quiet attention, and unspoken emotional resonance. And just as they packed up to leave, Lucas hesitated at the doorway, glancing at her, and said softly, "I'm glad we stayed behind," and Emma felt warmth flood through her chest, a combination of relief, excitement, and the recognition that their connection had deepened, and as they walked out into the hallway together, shoulders nearly brushing, hearts still racing from the close call, she realized that the delicate balance of anticipation, trust, and longing they shared in that classroom had created something unforgettable, something neither of them could ignore, and as they parted ways for the evening, the memory of that fleeting, almost intimate moment lingered in her mind, leaving her breathless, hopeful, and acutely aware that whatever challenges, misunderstandings, or obstacles lay ahead, the bond they were forging was strong, emotional, and worth protecting, a fragile yet powerful connection born from shared attention, quiet encouragement, and the thrilling, unspoken understanding that they were slowly discovering each other in ways that mattered more than grades or assignments, a connection that promised more moments of tenderness, more closeness, and more emotional resonance in the days to come, and Emma, heart still racing, whispered quietly to herself as she walked home, "I hope this doesn't end. I hope he feels the same," knowing that the emotional stakes were higher than ever, that the intensity of their shared moments was shaping both of them, and that every glance, every word, every touch, even the smallest, was a thread weaving them together in a story that was just beginning, full of possibilities, challenges, and emotional depth, a story neither of them would soon forget, a story that had already transformed the ordinary classroom into a place of quiet magic, intimate understanding, and a budding connection that felt tender, meaningful, and entirely their own. The days following that late afternoon in the classroom were filled with a new kind of anticipation for Emma, a tension that was both thrilling and comforting. Every time she saw Lucas she felt the flutter in her chest, a reminder of the moments they had shared, the quiet intensity of their connection, and the thought of seeing him outside of the structured project sessions made her heart race in ways she hadn't expected. She found herself lingering in the hallways, adjusting her backpack, pretending to check her notes, just to catch a glimpse of him walking by, noticing the small things, the way his hair fell slightly over his forehead, the faint crease in his brow when he concentrated, the calm way he organized his papers, and she realized that these details had become part of her daily awareness, her mind replaying their interactions, analyzing every glance, every subtle gesture, and the more she thought about it, the more she recognized the depth of her feelings, a mixture of admiration, longing, and trust that she hadn't felt before, and Lucas, though quiet and reserved, seemed increasingly attuned to her presence, his soft smiles, gentle nods, and careful explanations carrying unspoken acknowledgement of their growing bond. And one evening, as they stayed after school to finalize their project presentation, the classroom empty except for their shared presence, Emma felt a nervous excitement building as they worked side by side, the faint light of the setting sun streaming through the tall windows casting long, golden shadows, and she noticed Lucas hesitate as he reached for a beaker, his hand brushing against hers, and the touch, gentle but electric, made her heart flutter and pulse quicken, and she caught herself leaning closer, pretending to adjust a paper, feeling the warmth of his presence, the quiet reassurance of his proximity, and suddenly, the door handle rattled, startling both of them, a shadow passing quickly across the doorway, and for a second the air was filled with tension, the thrill of a close call making the quiet classroom feel charged with energy, and Emma instinctively grabbed his arm lightly, whispering, "It's okay. We're fine," and Lucas gave a small, reassuring smile, his eyes reflecting relief, and they continued their work, more aware than ever of the fragile, intimate bubble they had created together, a bubble full of unspoken feelings, tender glances, and subtle gestures, and as they carefully measured solutions, adjusted notes, and cross-checked calculations, Emma noticed the way Lucas's attention lingered on her expressions, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her directly, the way he seemed to wait for her input with genuine interest and patience, and she felt a deepening warmth in her chest, a sense of trust and connection that made the ordinary work feel extraordinary, a shared world within the walls of a classroom, small, intimate, and charged with emotional resonance. And when they finally set down their pens and notebooks, exhausted but satisfied, Lucas looked at her, his gaze holding a weight that made her breath catch, and he said softly, "I'm glad we did this together," and Emma felt a rush of emotions, relief, pride, affection, and something tender and thrilling all at once, and she replied, her voice barely audible but steady, "Me too," knowing that the statement carried more than just the completion of a project, but the acknowledgement of their bond, their shared journey, and the quiet emotional intimacy that had grown between them. And as they packed up their things, the classroom quiet except for the soft scraping of chairs and distant echoes of other students leaving, they walked toward the door side by side, shoulders nearly brushing, the simple act of being close enough to feel each other's presence sending warmth through both of them, and Lucas, glancing at her with a faint smile, said, "I hope this doesn't end," and Emma's chest tightened, a mix of anticipation, longing, and happiness, and she realized that she felt the same, that she didn't want the connection, the closeness, the moments of shared understanding and subtle tenderness to fade, and she whispered softly, "Neither do I," and the words hung between them, gentle yet significant, carrying the weight of unspoken feelings and mutual recognition, and as they stepped into the fading light of the hallway, their footsteps echoing softly, they shared a quiet laughter at a minor mishap with a notebook, and the ordinary sound felt extraordinary, colored by the intimacy of their shared attention, the closeness of their interaction, and the lingering excitement of a near interruption earlier. And in that moment, Emma realized how much she had come to rely on Lucas, not just for help with the project, but for the quiet reassurance, the steady presence, and the subtle emotional connection that had grown into something she couldn't ignore. And Lucas, noticing her lingering glance, gave her a small, knowing smile, a look that acknowledged their unspoken feelings without the need for grand declarations, and the simplicity of that acknowledgement made her heart swell with warmth, anticipation, and a gentle joy that carried her through the rest of the day. And as they reached the school doors, stepping out into the golden glow of the evening, they walked together, side by side, aware of the subtle electricity in the air, the unspoken promise lingering between them. And Emma felt a mixture of nervous excitement and quiet confidence, knowing that whatever the future held, this connection was meaningful, tender, and worth nurturing, a bond built on patience, understanding, laughter, encouragement, and the shared thrill of moments that belonged only to them, moments of vulnerability, trust, and gentle attraction that neither had rushed, moments that had grown naturally into something beautiful and emotionally resonant. And as they parted ways at the edge of the school grounds, Lucas paused and looked back at her, a soft smile on his lips, and Emma felt her chest tighten, a mixture of longing, hope, and anticipation, the memory of the classroom, the shared glances, the near interruptions, the gentle touches, and the quiet admissions of emotion weaving together into a tapestry of feelings that left her breathless, yet exhilarated, knowing that their story was only beginning, that the emotional connection they had forged in the quiet corners of the classroom had created something rare and precious, a delicate but undeniable bond that promised more moments of closeness, laughter, and emotional resonance. A connection that felt both tender and thrilling, intimate yet safe, and as Emma walked home that evening, the golden light fading into dusk, she felt a quiet confidence that they had found something special, something worth holding on to, a connection that had started with a project, grown through small gestures, shared vulnerability, gentle trust, and now stood at the threshold of something meaningful, tender, and deeply human, and she whispered to herself, her heart full, "I hope he feels the same. I hope this continues," knowing that the fragile, emotional, and subtly romantic bond they shared was the beginning of a story neither would forget, a story filled with moments of quiet joy, gentle tension, tender attraction, and heartfelt connection, a story that had transformed an ordinary classroom into a place of magic, discovery, and emotional resonance, a story that promised warmth, hope, and the unfolding of something extraordinary between two people learning to understand, trust, and care for each other in ways that went far beyond any simple assignment or passing grade, a story that was theirs and theirs alone, a story that had begun with a plea not to quit, and had grown into a profound, tender connection that neither time nor circumstance could easily diminish.